Camilla has finally been stripped of her royal titles, and the reason has left the palace shaken. After King Charles uncovered a dark secret she fought to keep hidden, everything changed. No warning, no mercy, just swift royal justice. What exactly did the king discover? Stay with us, you won't believe it. The moment Charles realized the truth. King Charles sat alone inside Buckingham Palace, staring at a letter that would change everything. It wasn't a dramatic letter. In fact, it looked like a regular notice from Camilla's office. But the meaning behind it? That cut deep. It stated that Queen Camilla would not attend the 50th anniversary event of the Royal Charitable Trust, an event that Charles himself had personally asked her to be present for. The reason? Busy schedule. But Charles didn't believe that for a second. He saw through it instantly. This wasn't about duty. It was about disinterest. It wasn't the first time Camilla had withdrawn when it mattered most. The pattern was becoming harder to ignore. Worse still, this event wasn't just another gathering. It was a deeply personal cause, tied to his mother's legacy, the late Queen Elizabeth II. A no-show from Camilla felt like more than a scheduling issue. It felt like a deliberate choice to distance herself from something sacred to the royal family. And then the pain deepened. As Charles sat there in silence, another memory came rushing in. The lonely days at Sandringham, when he was secretly fighting cancer earlier that year. He remembered how he waited, hoping for a visit, a call, or even a message from Camilla. But none came. Instead, the newspapers showed photos of her, laughing, waving, dressed head to toe in designer gowns. The headlines called her elegant, but to Charles, she looked detached, even cold. She wasn't there for me when I needed her the most, Charles reportedly told a close aide. That one sentence summed it all up. In that moment, something shifted inside him. The weight of past regrets, unspoken disappointment, and years of ignoring the obvious became too much. And that's when Diana's voice echoed in his memory. Words she'd spoken years ago, now hauntingly clear. If you choose her, you'll lose both. Charles realized what he had overlooked for far too long. The woman beside him, the one he'd defended through scandal and public hate, might never have been loyal to the man, only to the position. The crown had brought them together, but now it was also revealing who they both really were. As he looked at the fire crackling in the fireplace that evening, a quiet vow was made. No public statement, no sudden reaction. Just a private promise whispered into the quiet. No more deception. And from that silent decision, a chain of events would begin that neither Camilla nor the palace press office could stop. Because what followed wasn't just about skipping an event. It was about everything that came before, and everything that was about to come after. Abandoned during his darkest hour. Before the letter, before the silence, and before the headlines, there was a hospital room. It was winter at Sandringham, and King Charles was fighting a battle no crown could protect him from. Cancer. Machines beeped steadily. The palace kept everything under wraps. Only a handful of people knew the full truth. And Camilla wasn't one of them. Or maybe she was. But either way, she never came. In those long, quiet days, Charles waited. He hoped she'd walk through the door, that she'd sit beside him, hold his hand, say, "I'm here." But the door stayed closed. Instead, what he saw were photos of her, at events, on tours, smiling in flawless designer outfits. The press called her strong, a royal rock. But Charles, lying in that hospital bed, saw through it. She looked more like a ghost of loyalty than a partner. He'd spent years trying to rebuild her image. He took the public backlash. He stood firm beside her at the coronation. He called her Queen. And yet, when it truly mattered, when his body was failing and his heart was breaking, she was nowhere. Friends say this was when the real cracks began to form. Not in public, not on camera, but in Charles's soul. He thought of Diana, how she once sat with him through sleepless nights during the early days of their marriage. How she tried, even when he didn't. How she cared, even when the world crumbled around her. And then, he looked at the woman who now wore the crown Diana never had the chance to keep. And all he could think was, where is she now? That question never left his mind. In those days, Charles came to terms with something brutal. Camilla had loved status, not struggle. Appearances, not intimacy. She was a queen in title, but not in spirit. The illness may have weakened his body, but it sharpened his judgment. He started seeing who was truly standing by him, and who was standing in the spotlight, waiting to take credit, but never the burden. His recovery wasn't just physical, it was emotional. And when he returned to London, he was a different man, softer in public, but steelier in private. The man who had once defended Camilla at all costs now began preparing for a world where she was no longer at the center. And that world would arrive faster than anyone expected, because the next move Camilla made would seal her fate. The public humiliation that broke the silence. The palace had weathered scandals before, but this one didn't come from the outside. It came from inside, from Camilla herself. It started with a petty command. Ahead of a royal engagement, Camilla quietly instructed Catherine not to wear red. She claimed it would be too loud and might distract from the evening's focus. Catherine, respectful as ever, complied. But when the night arrived, Camilla walked in wearing a blazing scarlet gown. The room fell silent. Guests glanced at each other. The press didn't miss it either. By morning, headlines were everywhere. Queen orders Kate not to wear red, then wears it herself. What might have once passed as a harmless oversight now looked like something worse. The public saw it for what it was, a calculated move, fueled by jealousy. In contrast, Catherine stood out not with color, but with grace. Her quiet compliance made Camilla's choice look even more desperate. The backlash was swift. On social media, royal watchers accused Camilla of trying to outshine the future queen. Editors and commentators began to whisper, was the queen consort feeling insecure? Was she threatened by Catherine's rising popularity? But the most important reaction came not from the crowd, but from King Charles himself. Witnesses said he was visibly uncomfortable throughout the event. Later that evening, he canceled his briefing with Camilla for the first time in months. No conversation, no explanation, just distance. Because to him, the message was clear. Camilla wasn't acting like a queen. She was acting like a rival. And that moment broke something inside the palace. It was no longer just about coldness behind closed doors. Camilla had humiliated the crown in public, and it was Charles's crown she wore. What came next wasn't an argument. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a quiet shift in power, beginning behind palace walls and ending in the royal calendar. And the first person to feel it was Camilla. Catherine rises as Camilla falls. In the weeks that followed the red dress incident, the change became undeniable. Camilla was no longer invited into Charles's private meetings. Her name vanished from key planning documents. Aides were told to loop in Catherine, not Camilla. Then came the turning point, a royal initiative planning session inside Clarence House. Camilla was scheduled to co-lead it with Charles. But at the last minute, he walked in and handed the spotlight to Catherine. The Princess of Wales took the lead. She spoke clearly, confidently, outlining a bold new initiative focused on mental health and child development. Everyone applauded, except Camilla. She sat in silence as her stepson's wife was handed everything she had once fought to claim. That night, in a private confrontation, she demanded answers from Charles. "You humiliated me," she reportedly said. His response was colder than the Windsor marble floors. "This is no longer about you." That one sentence wasn't just painful, it was final. From that day forward, Catherine's presence became constant. Every royal engagement seemed to center around her. Every headline hailed her as the future of the monarchy. Even foreign leaders praised her warmth and poise. Meanwhile, Camilla faded, not by force, but by deliberate omission. Her events were fewer, her photo ops quieter. Her power, once defended by Charles himself, was now being handed to another woman. And unlike Camilla, Catherine hadn't taken anything. She'd earned every bit of it. In the eyes of the public, and increasingly within the palace, one truth became impossible to ignore. There could only be one queen the people truly admired. And it wasn't Camilla. But what would that mean for her title? Her status? Her very place in the royal structure? The answer came, not with noise, but with silence. And it started with the money. The quiet financial cutoff. There was no announcement, no public drama. Just a quiet unraveling of everything Camilla once controlled. It started with her royal funding. The sovereign grant, which had once covered her clothing, her staff, her travel, and her charities, was suddenly, silently revoked. At first, she didn't notice, but the signs piled up fast. Her senior aide of 15 years was reassigned. Her longtime driver? Gone. Even her favorite stylist disappeared without warning. When she asked questions, the answers were vague. Restructuring, streamlining, but she knew what it meant. Her influence was being cut off, piece by piece. Soon after, her access to Clarence House was reduced. She had to call ahead. She was no longer free to come and go. The same residence where she once hosted dignitaries and planned royal events was now out of reach, unless approved. Even the staff had changed. Fewer familiar faces, more silent glances, and every locked door reminded her that she no longer belonged. Inside palace records, her name was disappearing too. Where she once appeared beside Charles in planning documents and charity partnerships, now there were only blank spaces. Charity patronages, once proudly assigned to her, were quietly shifted to others, most of them to Catherine. And without the funding or staff, she couldn't keep up appearances. Camilla, who had risen to queen with power and presence, now looked more like a figure in the background, present but voiceless. A ceremonial title, nothing more. But Charles wasn't finished, because just as she was adjusting to this new, smaller role, a leak landed on his desk. A secret she'd kept from him, hidden in plain sight. And it would seal her fate for good. The secret that sealed her fate. The document came from deep inside the palace, buried in a folder marked confidential. But when King Charles opened it, everything changed. It revealed that Camilla had quietly lobbied to place her daughter, Laura, in a high-ranking position tied to the management of royal trusts. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a push. Emails, meetings, discussions with advisors, all without Charles's knowledge. And suddenly, the pattern became clear. This wasn't about duty. It was about legacy. Camilla hadn't just wanted the crown. She wanted a place for her bloodline inside the institution. A permanent one. And to Charles, that was the final betrayal. He had defended her through scandals, fought public anger, and rewritten history to make her queen. And this was what he got in return? Behind closed doors, he met with Princess Anne and Prince William. They'd both had their suspicions for months. Now they had proof. "This ends now," William said firmly. Charles didn't argue. For once, he had nothing left to say. He returned to his private quarters that evening with a decision already made. Camilla's reign, the influence, the access, the behind-the-scenes control, was over. No press release, no farewell dinner. Just a quiet conversation the next morning, where Charles looked her in the eye and told her the truth. "You went too far." And in that moment, the Queen Consort of the United Kingdom was no longer a queen in his eyes. She was a woman who had crossed the line, and he would not let the monarchy be used again. Not even by someone he once loved. But her punishment wasn't over yet, because what came next would not just strip her of power, it would erase her name from history. The royal title erased. The royal family knows how to act without speaking, and that's exactly what they did. There were no news cameras, no ceremonial announcements, no palace insider sources giving clever quotes to the press. Just a quiet operation set in motion with surgical precision. And at the center of it, one mission: strip Camilla of her title. Permanently. It began with one of the most symbolic moves of all. Her portrait was removed. For over a year, Camilla's image had hung proudly beside Charles in several key institutions and royal buildings. She was Queen Consort. Her face belonged next to the king. But one by one, the portraits came down. Her photo vanished from royal press kits, from websites, from the official invitations to state events. She wasn't being erased all at once. She was being phased out. Slowly, quietly, deliberately. Then came her title. Internally, staff were instructed to stop using Her Majesty. No more formal acknowledgements. No more references in speeches. And when it came to official rosters for upcoming appearances, Camilla's name was missing entirely. She wasn't even being cancelled. She was being ignored. Behind the scenes, access to key royal residences was shut down. Camilla, who once floated freely between Balmoral, Clarence House, and Sandringham, now needed permission just to step foot on the properties. Unless she was escorted by a senior royal, she wasn't allowed in. The same woman who once shared Charles's private wing now found herself locked out of homes, of rooms, and of conversations. Royal aides whispered that the order had come from the top, not whispered, not suggested, but signed and sealed by the king himself. No debate, no mercy. The woman he once loved enough to crown was now someone he viewed as a threat to the crown itself. But Camilla felt the sting most deeply in the silence. Because unlike all the headlines she once courted, the flattering articles, the glowing coverage, this new silence was icy and complete. The palace press office refused to comment. Royal family members refused to acknowledge her. Even her own team had been disbanded. She wasn't just being pushed aside, she was being shut down. And perhaps The final blow came not from policy or protocol, but from symbolism. At a recent high-level event, Charles walked in flanked by Prince William and Catherine. Not Camilla, not even a nod in her direction. Reporters noticed. Cameras zoomed in. The message was crystal clear. The monarchy had chosen its future, and Camilla was no longer part of it. Once titled, once celebrated, once protected, Camilla now stood without title, without role, without power. But what hurt most? The crown she fought so hard to sit beside had now turned its back on her. And it wasn't finished yet. Because what came next wasn't silence, it was strategic silence. Buckingham Palace goes silent, and that says everything. When a scandal rocks the monarchy, the palace usually moves fast. They deny, they spin, they call it misunderstood. But this time, nothing. No statement, no photos, no royal source whispering to the press. Just silence. Loud, echoing silence. And that's what made it so terrifying. Because in the world of royalty, silence isn't a pause. It's a punishment. It means the palace is done protecting you. And when Buckingham Palace goes silent, the public listens louder. For days, people waited for a rebuttal. Was Camilla still queen? Had Charles really erased her title? Had her privileges been revoked? Every journalist in London was digging for answers. But nothing came. No confirmation, no denial. Just the same quiet that surrounds a door that's already closed. And that was the answer. The palace had allowed the story to spiral on purpose. By not shutting it down, they were letting it live, grow, take root in the public's mind. They weren't correcting the narrative. They were endorsing it through silence. Behind that silence, a deeper strategy was unfolding. Charles had already made up his mind. He wasn't just punishing Camilla. He was preparing the monarchy for the future. A future led by William and Catherine. A monarchy reborn around youth, stability, and Diana's lasting memory. And Camilla didn't fit into that picture anymore. She was the chapter being closed, not the one being carried forward. Senior aides began referring to upcoming events as next-gen engagements, where Camilla was nowhere in sight. Catherine took over more of the public calendar. William began quietly shouldering more state duties. Even internal staff realignments hinted at a clear divide, those supporting the future and those loyal to the past. And as this new structure formed, Camilla became a problem the palace no longer had to solve. She wasn't invited. She wasn't mentioned. And when curious journalists asked about her upcoming schedule, they were told simply, "There are no updates at this time." No updates, no defense, no plans. Just a queen without a throne, watching from the sidelines as a new royal era began without her. And the silence? It didn't protect her. It buried her. But that silence was about to break, because in the shadows of her fall, a name was rising again. One name the public had never forgotten. Diana. And what happened next would make it clear Camilla wasn't just being removed. She was being replaced. Diana's legacy restored. As Camilla vanished from palace walls, another presence began to reappear, not in person, but in spirit. Diana. It started slowly. A few subtle moves, a title here, a gesture there. But those who were watching closely saw exactly what was happening. King Charles was rewriting the monarchy's memory, and this time, Diana was being written back in. He began by returning Diana's former patronages, not to Camilla, but to Catherine. Charities Diana once championed, causes she poured her heart into, were now handed to the daughter-in-law who mirrored her warmth, her grace, her connection to the people. Public appearances became tributes. Photos of Catherine visiting hospices, schools, mental health centers, all mirrored Diana's footsteps from decades ago. Then came something bigger, a private royal trust, named in Diana's honor. Charles quietly arranged for Catherine to become its sole guardian, alongside William. Insiders said it was deeply symbolic. The king was entrusting his former wife's legacy to the woman most trusted by his son, and by the public. And then came the part that could not be ignored: his will. Charles began restructuring his private estate. Leaks confirmed what many had suspected. Camilla was being cut out. No inheritance, no estates, no royal residences. The full weight of the king's private wealth, Balmoral, Sandringham, duchy holdings, all were being passed directly to William and his children. Not a single line left for Camilla's side of the family. And perhaps most poignantly, Charles commissioned a new memorial garden at Kensington Palace, in Diana's name. The public would be allowed to visit it. School children would walk through it. It would stand not just as a tribute to the past, but as a warning to those who tried to rewrite it. "She will always be remembered," Charles reportedly told one of his closest aides. And properly. It was never spoken out loud, but the message was clear. Diana was back. And her return meant Camilla's place was now permanently altered. Because how do you stand beside the king when the memory of the queen who came before you has reclaimed the nation's heart?
Camilla wasn't just being removed from the present, she was being blocked from the future.
And what followed next would confirm that her time in the monarchy was finished. The end of Camilla's royal reign. From palace power to public exile, Camilla's fall was swift, silent, and brutal. 1 year ago, she stood beside King Charles at the coronation, crowned queen consort in front of the world. Now, she was alone at Raymill House, stripped of title, staff, and status, her name barely whispered inside royal walls. There was no farewell speech, no parting tour, just a woman who once wore the crown, now watching from the shadows as it passed her by. She still held the title on paper. But in reality, she was a ceremonial ghost. No appearances, no engagements, no press team. Even her security detail had been reduced, now assigned only during high-profile events, and only by request. Every photograph of her next to Charles began to feel outdated. Tabloids no longer referred to her as Queen. Public opinion had turned cold. And within the palace, the silence grew louder. Rooms she once walked through freely now required clearance. People who once bowed in her presence now glanced away. Even Charles, sources say, had begun referring to official matters without her in the equation. It was as if she had never been there at all. And yet, this wasn't just punishment. It was preservation. The monarchy had survived wars, divorces, scandal. But to survive the modern age, it needed a new image, one the public could believe in, one tied to the memory of Diana, one led by William and Catherine. Camilla didn't fit. Not anymore. She had spent decades climbing to the top, reshaping her image, controlling the press, molding the narrative. But what she couldn't control was the one thing she never truly earned: the people's trust. Because in the end, no title, no crown, and no coronation can rewrite what the public already feels in their hearts. Camilla's time as queen consort is over. The palace won't say it, but the silence has. And history? It will remember her rise, but it will never forget her fall. Camilla's royal reign is over, titles gone, influence erased, and the crown no longer hers to share. King Charles made his choice, and the monarchy has moved on. What do you think of the king's decision? Was it too late or just in time? Let us know below, and don't forget to subscribe.